Hey, so I know this is going to get the trolls fired up, but a new analysis just stated what we've all been able to see, saying, quote, the Ukrainian defense is proving to be durable, and it's the Russian offense that's struggling. And they back this up with data showing that Russian progress right now is slower and coming at a higher cost than at any time in the war. On top of that, a new poll shows that domestic support inside of Russia for Putin's war just reached an all-time low. So starting with this new assessment from the Washington Post that'll be linked in the description below, they first start by talking about the change in territorial control. They say currently Russian forces occupy 19.4% of Ukrainian territory. They say that peaked in 2022 at just shy of 27%, but after a Ukrainian counteroffensive moved back to 17.9%. So they say in the last 3.5 years, Russia has seized only 1.5% more Ukrainian land while suffering over 1 million casualties in total. Quote, let that sink in. Russia has needed 3.5 years to seize 9,318 square kilometers, an area smaller than Lebanon or Los Angeles County. Putin's march to victory has been proceeding, as others have noted, more slowly than at a snail's pace. It is. It's slower than World War I standards on the Western Front, which is wild because that's the war that didn't make any progress at all. And this is one we know where the pushback comes. It's not about territorial control, but yet when you look at Russian channels and how they're measuring progress in the war, it's about territorial control. And they celebrate the taking of new territory, and that's kind of what the focus has been for some time now. So the lack of territorial control and the staggering casualties that are taken in that process is notable, to say the least. Now, before moving on to the second part, we just kicked off a new fundraiser with Ziggy's Paw. So great group. Got to meet them when I was over in Ukraine a couple months ago. This is the first one we've done with them since then, and it's for these Lightning medium-range strike drones. We're helping out the 26th Artillery Brigade. So great unit. We've worked with these guys before. $50,000 goal, and we already have some progress here. I just announced this on Twitter or X and Instagram yesterday, and we've already got donations coming in, which is awesome. But I told the Ziggy's Paw folks, like, just wait until this goes on YouTube. That's the crew over there. They're animals when it comes to fundraising. We're going to hammer this thing. So this is a medium-range strike drone, allowing the 26 to hit targets outside of FPV range. And interesting one here for those that are interested and able in donating. $800, you get a message or a picture or whatever you want, a sticker on one of these drones. I mean, you can see there's a lot of real estate to put whatever you want on one of these things. Or team gift, right? Doing something for the whole family. $3,000, you put a message on 5 drones. So for those interested and able, the link to contribute will be in the description and pinned comment below. Again, $50,000 goal to help out the 26th Artillery Brigade. Looking forward to seeing how quick we knock this one out of the park. Now, turning back to the Washington Post article here, they then shifted over to the counterattacks the Ukraine has carried out. They said, quote, Ukrainian forces have not only held Russian advances to a slow crawl, but they have begun to push Russian forces back in localized counterattacks since last autumn. Ukrainian forces liberated the town of Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast in November and retook tactically important positions in Zaporizhia last month. In fact, Ukrainian forces have made net daily gains more frequently over the past 6 months than they had in the previous 9. Meanwhile, Russian weekly gains during this year are below their highs from last year. Indeed, Ukraine liberated more land than Russian forces seized the last 2 weeks of February. A quick correction there, Kupiansk is not fully liberated. There are still ongoing fights. There's a small Russian contingent inside of Kupiansk right now. They're surrounded, they're cut off, but it's not fully accurate to say that entire city has been retaken by Ukraine. But again, it is wild that we are 4 years into this, and we're talking about a period of time where Ukraine has made more progress on the battlefield than Russia, especially because Russia has been in a constant state of attack since day one. And what we're seeing more recently are some of these kind of smaller scale, deliberate counterattacks. In fact, the Ukrainian GUR just announced some of this, kind of straightening the lines in Zaporizhia a couple days ago, and they released this footage here, saying, quote, units of the GUR stopped the enemy's offensive in Zaporizhia in their zone of responsibility. For 3 months, soldiers of the Timur Special Unit of the GUR Ministry of Defense of Ukraine have been implementing a complex defensive operation in the Zaporizhia direction. The goal of the scouts is to disrupt the enemy's offensive plans and prevent his advance to the regional center. During active operations, the GUR Special Forces eliminated more than 300 Russians killed and wounded and took another 39 prisoner. With precise strikes from drones and artillery, scouts systematically limit the logistical capabilities of the Russians due to lack of support. The Russians are increasingly abandoning assault operations in this direction. The actions of the Special Forces allowed them to stabilize the defense in the lines favorable for the Ukrainian defenders and secure Zaporizhia. This is the localized counterattacks we've been talking about in recent days, or at least recent weeks. It's been going on for a while now, months if you want to go back to, almost a year at this point. We go back to Dobropilia and Kupiansk, but Ukraine is doing highly targeted operations to straighten out the lines, flush out, hunt down, and kill or capture the Russian soldiers that infiltrate through positions in places, in this case, like the western side of Zaporizhia. The Washington Post article continues saying, speaking directly with Ukrainians only underlines the point. Ukrainian commanders with whom we met on a recent trip seemed more confident about their ability to hold the Russians off than they have been since 2023. When we spoke with these same commanders last year, they were concerned about the prospects of renewed enemy advances, but the Ukrainian armed forces have held the Russian fall and winter offensive to limited territorial gains. And the commanders rightly pointed out that most of those gains were empty fields and tiny villages, not large cities or fortified positions. Pokrovsk, great example here, right? I mix this up all the time. I want to say it's the 72nd largest city or town in Ukraine. It's around there, at least. And that was the crown jewel of 2025 for Russia. But here's the thing. They didn't even take it. There's still, the northern area of Pokrovsk is still heavily contested according to Russian sources. So, yeah, they're moving at a heavy loss. And it's interesting to hear that the Ukrainian commanders are more confident in their ability to stop the Russians now than they were 2 years ago. In fact, one of those assaults that's been stopped recently just came out a couple days ago from the 225th Assault Brigade. They shared this footage saying, hey, Russia's trying more armored assaults. They're back to that. We talked about that in a recent video. I guess all dismounted and ATV and motorcycle assaults are maybe dwindling a little bit. They're going to go back to trying some of these armored assaults for a period of time. Anyways, the 225th said, quote, the Russians from the 40th Marine Amphibious Brigade once again tried to break through in the direction of Huliopoli. Yesterday, they failed to carry out an infiltration with a small infantry group, but for unknown reasons, they believed it in their own strength and decided to try this time again with armored vehicles. They say a tank, an armored personnel carrier, 2 quad bikes with a landing force or dismounts, were timely detected by the operators of the 414th Separate Air Assault Brigade, Magyar's Birds. After this, drones from the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, 5th Separate Assault Kiev Brigade, and other units joined the operation. They say the equipment was set on fire and the landing force tried to hide in residential buildings, but death caught up with them there too. That's the thing with these armored assaults. Like, the reason we were seeing small dismounted movements is it's harder to spot a single infantryman moving through even an open field, let alone a tree line or urban setting, than a tank. When a tank gets spotted in that kill zone, like, you can see it right here. At least 3 different units swarmed drones and possibly artillery on that one position. It becomes a high-value target. Like, everyone wants the tank kill. So there's no chance. Again, we saw this in videos just a couple days ago where Russia started pushing more tanks and APCs into the kill zone, and what that meant was, multiple units got in on this, teamed up, and knocked those things out really quickly. We'll see. There's the possibility, and we talked about this in the last video, there's the possibility that Russia is moving away from those dismounted assaults because it's costing so many men and moving back towards some of these armored assaults at the hope that some of them make it through or at least protect some of the infantry for a little bit longer. The article continues by saying Ukraine's army has continued to improve and perfect its so-called wall of drones, which has managed to blunt Russia's manpower advantage on the front. Ukraine has also embarked on a remarkable long-range strike campaign using both drones and even a new type of domestically produced cruise missile. They're beginning to deploy mid-range weapons to disrupt Russian offensive efforts before they reach the line of contact, and they have even been able to take advantage of Russia overextensions and missteps to retake ground. Hey, those mid-range weapons to hit Russian forces before they're able to start their attack, that's the Lightning that we're fundraising for, or that's one of them that we're fundraising for right now for the 26th Field Artillery. That is getting more and more attention, these mid-range strike drones. And speaking to this kind of mid to long-range strikes, there was an ATACMS strike a couple days ago. I don't know if you guys saw this. Massive effects on target. So It looks like it was the Donetsk International Airport was being used to store and launch Shahed strike drones. Shocking that Russia was using this facility, if I'm being honest. Like, it's well within range of a number of Ukrainian munitions. And if they want to hit Ukraine with these drones, they do need to be within a certain range, but pushing them into Donetsk, I mean, the benefit for Russia there is there's a shorter timeline for Ukraine to detect the munition launch, shorter time for them to be able to shoot it down, but everything in Donetsk can be hit with ATACMS right now, and it looks like it was a combination of ATACMS and Storm Shadow and or Scalp. According to a couple different reports, they say this is the aftermath, for what it's worth. The entire thing is burning. But it looks like significant damage. Quite a few of those Shaheds were taken out and probably destroying the facility to where they might not be able to launch from for a period of time going forward. So again, this is kind of our terminology has changed so much during this war, right? At one point, I mean, right now, short-range drone strikes are in like the 20 to 30 kilometer range. That's crazy. Right? There's a lot of cannon artillery that can't range 30 kilometers, but now that's a short-range strike. And I remember talking to somebody in Ukraine when I was there and was talking about wanting to learn more about the long-range strike capabilities, and he immediately thought I was talking about like Moscow and beyond. It's like, oh, wow. No, I mean, I was just talking like 100 kilometers or something. So the ranges on these weapon systems are continuing to expand, and Ukraine is taking advantage of that, hitting targets further and further from the line of contact. The article says estimates of how long it will take the Russians to complete the seizure of Donetsk at current rates of advancing range from 2 to 3 years. But it's far from obvious that the Russians can sustain their current rate of advance, especially as they try to take fortified urban areas that constitute the forest belt. I'm going to go to a map to show you this area here real quick. The area that Russia wants to take, when we zoom out a little bit, we've got the areas that they have already claimed ownership of, right? So Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. They generally have all of Luhansk now, but this pocket here is kind of the area. You can kind of see that outline on the map. It's actually, I think it's better, easier to see on this map here. So all of this is what they would still need to take. And what the analysis here is saying is that they're barely making it through fields, but to actually take all of this, listen to what they'd have to take. All the Dobropilia area, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. Like, what? These are massive defensive areas, significant fortress belts that Russia hasn't even gotten to yet that they would have to break through. So the analysis in this article is 2 to 3 years to even take this little chunk of territory, let alone the rest of Ukraine. The analysis continues there by saying the Ukrainian defense is proving to be durable, and it's the Russian offense that is struggling. The way to end this war is to not rescue Putin from a failing campaign, but to help Ukraine make it fail faster. And, you know, kind of mixed signals. I like that idea. I think that's the appropriate way to view this. I don't think we're doing it at all right now, personally, in terms of U.S. support. Kind of mixed on if the war in Iran is moving us closer to that or not. A lot of back and forth here. So, look, the United States, no doubt, is distracted with Iran right now. We have troops in harm's way on the receiving end of Iranian drones and missiles. So, absolutely, that is going to get America's attention more than any other conflict happening around the world. That's understandable. There have been a couple things that have come out recently that I think might shape U.S. perception of the war in Ukraine and how that leads to supporting Ukraine or dialing up sanctions on Russia. But unfortunately, I think they kind of balance out here. So CNN had this was reported across a number of outlets. The one I'm showing here is CNN, where they said Russia is providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft. I mean, yeah, we knew that, right? It's kind of like an open secret. We help Ukraine with their targeting inside of Russia. I think that's probably dialed back a little bit in the course of the last year, but this is the kind of thing that we should have Americans like frothing at the mouth. Like, are you kidding me? Especially now that we've lost 7 American soldiers in this fight. There's long been speculation that the Russians were assisting maybe the Houthis trying to hit U.S. ships in the region, maybe Hezbollah, certainly close ties with Iran. This should fire up the Americans and say very clearly Russia is the enemy. Of course, this comes amidst Ukraine offering to help the Gulf states as well as the United States with interceptors to shoot down the Iranian drones. Like, we're pretty clearly seeing a shaking out here of good guys and bad guys, if you will. that's a positive step in terms of the information space, maybe shifting some U.S. sentiment in Ukraine's favor here for the short or long-term support. But at the same time, we are easing sanctions on Russia, making it easier for them to continue the war. The BBC said, quote, "The U.S. government has temporarily eased sanctions to allow India to buy Russian oil currently stranded at sea amid escalating tensions in the Middle East." Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the 30-day waiver was a deliberate short-term measure to allow oil to keep flowing in the global market. They said the waiver marks a notable shift in the U.S. approach to India's Russian oil imports. So, look, the Strait of Hormuz situation is pretty dicey, to say the least, and already is starting to have a global impact. So the intent here, from my understanding, is trying to stave off some of that global disruption to the supply chain and to the oil markets. Unfortunately, it's like an immediate backtrack on some of these sanctions that were just very recently. I guess these are longer standing sanctions, but come on. It doesn't help, right? The noose is tightening around Russia in so many different ways. To just let off the gas at any point isn't helpful when it comes to the ability for Russia to continue fighting this war. Another one that's not getting enough attention, or doesn't get much attention at all, really, is Russian domestic support for the war. And we're actually starting to see what might be the first kind of falling off in that regard. So I came across this from the I Want to Live project a couple days ago. It was some Levada Center polling, and polls are tricky, right? Polls in Russia are even trickier on top of that. This was 1,625 people over at the end of February that they asked these polls of. I don't know how authentic these are, but they've been doing it for a long time. And my gut would say that they're probably, the people that answer the polls, if they're worried about answering it correctly, they're probably more pro-Putin, right? And saying he's doing everything great. They're probably less likely to come out against the government if they're concerned about answering polls. So keep that in mind. They say the majority of Russians, 67%, believe that peace negotiations are now necessary. This share has increased by 6 percentage points since last month, thus reaching an all-time high. Meanwhile, the share of those who believe military action should continue has fallen again to a quarter of respondents, reaching an all-time low of 24%. Now, technically, according to this graph, continuing the war has always been an underwater subject in Russia. Going back to day one, or when these polls were first conducted, it was -4. More people were interested in conducting negotiations than fighting the war, again, according to this poll. But the trend here is ridiculous. From -4 back in February to -43 right now. -43 on any issue is shocking. Now, to be clear, it's not like the Russians are going to be able to go to the polls tomorrow and vote and say, that's it, the end of the war, bring everybody home, we're done. However, less support inside of Russia for the war is a net positive. And again, watching that trend line, that is a good direction. I don't know that if this ends up having an impact next week, next month, next year, or sometime down the road. But again, it is a net positive that more Russians are looking at this saying, no, we've got to find another way to do this. But kind of a mixed bag with this poll, and I'll have the poll results all linked in the description below, because it also shows that nobody's really paying attention, which is wild to me when you think about it. So according to this poll, only 14% of Russians are monitoring the situation in Ukraine carefully. Only 30% are somewhat paying attention, and 56% said they are not paying attention at all, little to not at all. This is a massive war. I mean, take whatever number of casualties you feel most comfortable with being accurate, and then divide that in half to say that, maybe even that one is over-exaggerated. And you've still got 14% of the country actually paying attention to what's happening day in and day out. That's wild to me. This also comes with what appears to be, inside of Russia, still support for the military, support for the troops, not necessarily support for the war. That's important because, it does look like Russia is becoming more and more nationalistic in that sense. And between nobody paying attention and support for the military, that might be enough to cancel out support for the war. This poll says that 72% support the actions of the military, compared with only 17% that is opposed. Again, I think the best way to interpret that is they support the troops. They want to see the troops perform well. They think the military is doing a good job. But then when asked a subsequent question, should we be fighting the war, the answer is trending more and more towards no. It's interesting. I don't know how much value to place in a Russian poll, how much the people there. Now, the polling data is broken out across like demographics, all sorts of crazy nuance to get into it. Overall, the older men are more likely to support war. Women are less likely. And then as you get younger generations are less and less likely. And an interesting one here was people that get their information from YouTube or outside of traditional Russian media outlets are less likely to support the war than anyone else. What do you know? But again, if you want to dig into the details of that, it'll be linked in the description below, as will our new fundraiser with Ziggy's Paw to pick up some Lightning drones for the 26th Field Artillery. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.